Instead of throwing the bankers in jail, Ben Bernanke, who won the Nobel Prize, saved the banks. And so he was given the Nobel Prize for saving the banks and bankrupting the American economy. If you go to America and you take an economics course, that's what you're taught. The economy should be loaded down with debt by the 99% of the population to pay the 1% of the population. Most people have never heard of the people who win the Nobel Prize because they're all academics. So you have to understand, what is economics and what is an economist? Who are these people who win the Nobel Prize? They're people who follow the University of Chicago economics that say society should work best if there's no government at all. If there's no government regulation, there should be no government spending, no public health. Everybody should have to pay for their health. There should be no free education, and there should be no price regulation, and there should be no taxes. Instead of society being run by governments, society should be run by the banks, and the banks should allocate the resources to wherever money can be made fastest without any government regulation at all. Well, the result is that you will have an economy that looks like Margaret Thatcher's England, or right now, Liz Truss's England, drastically cutting taxes on the rich, or like America is doing. The economy in reality will shrink. The Nobel Prize is given for saying that economies will not shrink, that if you get rid of governments, economies will actually grow. So it's a particular kind of ideology that is backed by economic models, but without statistics. When I became an economist 60 years ago and got a PhD, I ended up going to work for Wall Street corporations. One of my bosses said that, well, he knew that I didn't learn anything by studying economics in college, and they hire economists basically to do accounting, to do statistics, and to write reports. But he said, we know you don't learn anything of value, but getting a PhD shows that you're willing to work very hard, even for something that you know doesn't matter very much and has nothing to do with the world as it really works. And if you're willing to work that hard to get a PhD for something that is just completely irrelevant, then we think you'll be good working for a corporation, because you'll work on something and it doesn't matter whether what you're working on helps society or not. You just want to make money for us and for the corporation, and therefore by yourself. So the PhD is just a sign that you're willing to be very abstract and work. There was no idea that economics should actually be about how the world works. There really isn't an academic discipline for that. So if you get to America and you take an economics course, what do economists do here if you get an economics degree? Almost the only thing you can do is to teach, because corporations are not even hiring economists anymore. They're hiring an accountants, or they're hiring lawyers. And if you look at the people who got the economics, it was to the head of the central bank. Basically, the key point of the central banker who won was banks should not lose money. If a bank makes a bad loan, or even if crooks take over the banks, the government has to lose money, and the economy has to lose money, but the economy is being run for the banks, by and for the banks. And that's what the Federal Reserve does. The Federal Reserve in America, who had won the economics prize, was basically for bailing out the banks after President Obama didn't throw the bankers in jail. You had the biggest crime wave in American history in 2008. Banks were writing fake mortgages, false income statements, and finally the whole fictitious bank loan fell apart. And instead of writing down the bank loans to reflect actual market prices for the people who'd taken out mortgages to buy the banks, the head of the Federal Reserve said, in order to save the banks, we have to inflate real estate prices. We have to double the price of home ownership in the United States. And if we double the price of home ownerships, then Citibank and the other American banks won't have to go bankrupt. In 2008, the biggest banks in America were bankrupt. The loans they made couldn't be collected. The balance sheet of assets they had, the mortgage loans, were much less than the amount of money they owed the depositors. So the Federal Reserve said, first of all, we're going to slash interest rates to zero for 14 years, which is what they've done. We're going to double and triple housing prices. We're going to triple stock and bond prices. We're going to make the 1% who owned most of the stocks and bonds very, very rich. And we're going to impoverish the rest of the economy. We're going to reduce home ownership in the United States. We're going to reduce pension fund ability to pay pensions. And we're going to essentially begin to pay interest on bank deposits with the Federal Reserve, the central bank.
Two of AIG's former CEOs were grilled about a retreat where only a week after being bailed out by taxpayers, its executives spent $440,000 on oceanfront rooms, rounds of golf, and trips to the resort spa and salon.
They were getting their manicures, their facials, their pedicures, and their massages, while the American people were footing the bill.
One of the worst days I had came when we learned that AIG was contractually obligated to pay bonuses to some of the people in the financial products division.
American people had to bail out AIG, but most Americans still lost 40 to 50% of their retirement plans.
If we had not made that action, they would have lost 70%.
Did the people who took out insurance with AIG to insure their retirement plans get reimbursed 100%, so they suffered very little loss? Yes or no? Not one of you three can give me a yes on that answer, or no.
Because it's a poorly posed question.
And the result was, instead of throwing the bankers in jail, Ben Bernanke, who won the Nobel Prize, saved the banks. And so he was given the Nobel Prize for saving the banks and bankrupting the American economy.
Several hundred people packed into Bowling Green Park.
If you go to America and you take an economics course, that's what you're taught. The economy should be loaded down with debt by the 99% of the population to pay the 1% of the population. So if you come to America, you'll learn that everything that China has done is against what they're writing the Nobel Prize for. That according to the American theory that's taught in economics, China couldn't work. China's doing everything wrong. First of all, it's giving free healthcare. It wants to keep people from getting sick. That actually slows down economic activity because you're not going to restaurants, you're not going out. And most of all, when you get sick, the GDP goes up in America, because when you get sick, you pay much more money to the doctors, their ambulance bills, their hospital bills. The sicker America is, the more GDP, national income and product, go up. Secondly, China doesn't charge for education like America. In America, you have to go into debt for 20 or 30 years in order to get a degree. China gives it for free. Also, China doesn't let billionaires take over the government. It actually says you can make money, but not so much money. We want income and wealth to be more equal. In America, they say that's wasteful. The more polarized an economy is, the more proportion that the 1%, the richest 1% owe, the richer an economy is. So in America, you're learning exactly the opposite of what China does. And of course, if you look at the actual statistics, then you see that America's shrinking and China's growing. And so when you make an economic model to win the Nobel Prize, you don't use actual statistics. You use a mathematical formula and say, if the statistics were working like this formula, then everything would be fine. But you don't actually look at statistics or the real world. That's not taught in economics anymore. For the last few years, the professors that I talk to and the students say they're not taught about how to use statistics or what statistics mean or do anything that have to do with tracing a picture of how economies really work. It's almost like an archaic, abstract theology or religion. There's no alternative view taught here. In America, and for the Nobel Prize, there's no teaching of economics history. There's no teaching of the history of economic thought. So you don't understand what Adam Smith and Karl Marx and other writers of the 19th century said. They just don't even appear in the curriculum. And basically, this is the University of Chicago's Milton Friedman theory, the kind of idea that was brought to Shanghai in the 1970s by Milton Friedman, trying to convince China to deregulate the economy. And actually, that had a very good result because indeed, Deng did let a lot of individual enterprise come in. But fortunately, China, once it let this enterprise make money and be prosperous, it didn't make any attempt to let the wealthy people take over. It was all done within the government setting a framework so that China would balance the growth and raise the living standards of the whole country. You're going to educate people more. You're going to give them more money to buy better clothes, cars, doing exactly the opposite of what's happened in the United States. Now, in earlier lectures, to all of you, I've described the distinction between industrial capitalism or industrial socialism on the one hand and finance capitalism on the other. The Nobel Prize is given to defend finance capitalism. And it says that deindustrialization is actually a good idea because markets really are not supposed to be manipulated by monopolies gouging prices or by banks acting crookedly. The models that economists use don't have any crime in them. They don't have any monopolies in them. Everybody earns, supposedly, however much they make. And if you have a billionaire, they actually earn it by adding to production, not by being a monopolist. And if you say that they're, oh, what about monopoly rent? What about the debt problem? What about deindustrialization? The Nobel Prize people will say, well, that's not what economics is all about.
One of you three can give me a yes on that answer, or no.
Because it's a poorly posed question.
It's really all about distributing the income and wealth that people have, but we don't ask how people got this wealth. We don't ask how people got the income. It just doesn't matter. One way of making money is just as productive as any other way of making money or making wealth. And of course, that trivializes economy. If that were the case, how would the government ever decide, how are we going to make China richer? What kind of sectors are we going to subsidize? How are we going to promote China developing along lines that make everybody richer? The Americans say that's not economics, that's something else. Unfortunately, there isn't any something else that's taught over here. So as said often before here, I'm not sure why Chinese students are sent to the United States to study, except how to speak English with an American accent is valuable for going to international meetings, but you're not actually supposed to pay attention to what you're studying and believe that it's realistic. It's an exercise. It's sort of like playing a game. What if this parallel universe worked in this way? Well, how would this game be played in the parallel universe? Well, the main person, there were three people who got the Nobel Prize, and the only one who everybody knows is the Federal Reserve Chairman, Ben Bernanke, for bailing out the bank. It was a disaster bailing out the banks. The American economy now is burdened with debt. Homeowners, renters, wage earners own so much money for either their rent or mortgage debt, for their medical debt, for their education debt, for their credit card debt. They don't have enough money to buy goods and services. So the living standards in the United States are going down and down and down. Well, they're going down. Somebody's getting rich. All the money that they're not spending on goods and services is being paid on debt service to stocks and bonds that are owned by the 1%. So really, the economics is all about how democracy is bad, socialism is bad, oligarchies are good. And that's sort of the political bottom line. And what makes economics pretty irrelevant for it's certainly not very progressive at all. And as long as the financial sector is in charge of the Nobel Prize, because the Nobel Prize is given by people who've won the Nobel Prize in the past, and they all come either from the University of Chicago or from that free market theory, and their theories are what have destroyed the American economy, the British economy, and are now destroying the European economies. The most free market economy is England, and England is the only country in Europe whose GDP, whose output is less now than it was before COVID. And that's looked as a success story from the point of view of economic theory. Well, meanwhile, there are riots in the street protesting all of this. So I guess most people don't know any of the other Nobel Prize winners because it has nothing to do with their life except to make their life worse and worse because of their free market ideas.